Hooray! 250. Oh my gosh. Wow. I have been slacking today. All right. It's okay. It's okay. We had a lot of fun. Do you like that method where you teach something the wrong way to have it corrected later? I do. So the difference here is it's kind of funny that you say the wrong way to have it corrected later. What's the best way to describe this? The question is, do I correct it later or do it go away? Right? So if I were playing quarter notes and I only played each measure, am I doing it incorrect after piecing it back together? So for example, like if you were to play one measure of a song, right? If you had like 6 measures and you played each measure separately, and you continue to play each measure separately until you can put it back together, right? Is that the wrong way or the correct way? I don't know. The true answer here is I don't know. Part of my learning process, this is the correct way for my learning process. So how do I get to English fluency? You have an interesting question about this, actually. Okay. So we can try to talk about this before the end because I need to head out for today. Today is a half day. I usually go for another like 3 or 4 hours probably. Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a very intellectually and emotional question, but largely intellectually. I'm gonna say it's the wrong way if you want to sound like a Japanese person. For me, I learn things by clustering. So, in a way, I prefer to learn Japanese proficiently than not Japanese at all, I guess. Have you guys ever learned a word incorrectly in your native language, like when you were a kid and hear a word said the wrong way and you learned it that way? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, this one is where it's context dependent, unfortunately. Because of the English's flexibility, it is the wrong way, but it's also acceptable. So I know this sounds oxymoronic, right? Oxymoronic, but English accepts multiple wrong ways. Yeah, so English is often corrected formally, but also not corrected informally, right? And the question you're asking here is wrong and right tends to deal with fluency, right? To deal with fluency. And fluency tends to be what's the end game? Communication. So would I say someone, but didn't you have somewhere stuck with you the wrong way? That's a good question. That's a very good question. Do I have words that are stuck in the wrong way? I think in this case, if I'm gonna suggest my own personal take on this, since my learning method is often contextualized from its origins, I guess I prefer to retrain something than not train at all. So it takes me less time to unlearn something than to learn something. I'm learning, someone like me, I get really, really used to unlearning something and learning something, and not really unlearning something, integrating the things that I know into something else. So for example, I don't unlearn something, I learn that this is associated with it. So for example, hear me out. If say I don't have a good English version, but I have a good Japanese from an English perspective version. So for example, if you say Akuma, right? Akuma. I'm pretty sure it's Akuma, right? And this is an English example. The reason why I'm saying Akuma versus Akuma is that Akuma is the English name designation of a very particular Street Fighter character. And this happens a lot in any Japanese, like when you're playing video games. So like, for example, Tatsugeki or Totsugeki or Tosugeki, right? Tosugeki. And do I say both? I mean, sometimes I say both. The reason why it's not wrong or right to me is because they're associated. So I guess I'm taking an English approach to this. So when someone says, that ain't right. That ain't right. Whoa. That isn't right, per se. It doesn't affect my way of understanding that person. So generally, I wouldn't go out of my way to correct it. I could tell them that that isn't right. And you can choose to use that ain't right or that isn't right. There's a time and place for it, right? So unfortunately, I guess my short answer here is it's English. If it was Japanese, I could understand why someone would unlearn something and just forget about it. I try not to forget about mistakes, quote unquote, wrong and right ways. That's very effective in teaching people stuff. So for example, if you unlearn something, you become blind to it. So say, I'm trying to think of a good English example that I've learned incorrectly. The word... See, this is showing what I mean by unlearning stuff. Now I can't think of examples. And that's terrible, in my opinion. It's terrible because then the problem has to come up first. Oh, duct tape? Duct tape. Yes. So, if I thought it was duct tape, right? If I thought it was duct tape, I would always know it's duct tape and duct tape. To remember duct tape, right? Duct tape, I would know duct tape. If you know what I mean. So what I mean is, I don't unlearn duct tape. I add on to duct tape. So the fun, like, when you say mnemonics, right? The difference between a mnemonic and a wrong way is that a mnemonic is often a euphemism for being useful. A habit, like a bad habit, is something you want to unlearn. But I generally don't unlearn something. I use it as a way to learn something. So going back to what Indy asked about, does it bother you that you're learning something the wrong way to correct it later? It's not the wrong way to get to the to be corrected. It's the way I take to get to the corrected way, to get to the right way. So to get to the desired way, I do it this way because it paves the road for that. As kids, we don't think this way. Usually we don't. And I'm 37, so I don't think this way anymore. In fact, if you do think this way, you're gonna struggle a lot as an adult. So if you start thinking about learning the right way from the start, you're going, in my opinion, you're going to struggle as an adult learner. So learning process to me fundamentally changed once you are no mechanically naive anymore. So, intellectually naive. So when you are intellectually naive as a kid, you are a great mechanical learner. So you form the habits and the foundations for those mechanics. So yes, that's great. It's great advice to learn, quote unquote, the right way, because they have to develop intellectual awareness to be able to integrate new knowledge. As an adult, you no longer learn that way. In my opinion, the hot take here is you no longer learn that way once you reach 18 plus. It's arbitrary, but I usually think by 18, you'll probably encounter your first intellectual interference. Basically, the first time you're going to ask yourself, do I unlearn something because I'm learning something that is substituting for it? And I personally, how to retain the most amount of skills, if you're a skill seeker like me, I suppose, if you like learning things, you don't abandon what you learn, you integrate what you learn. So all your experiences of learning decreases the learning curve of your future experiences. So I'm approaching Japanese this way because I don't want to throw away my learning experience. I don't choose to learn the Japanese way. I choose to learn the English way integrated into the Japanese way. Much like a lot of adult people who tries to acquire a new skill, what they attempt to do is try to forget all their bad habits instead of working their habits into their learning experience. So I already know what my habits are. I already know a lot of intellectual practices that I have done in English all the time. Instead of spending an inexorbitant amount of effort to try to unlearn the whole year, like all my life's experiences of learning, I choose to use it. Sometimes the most process of learning is the most enjoyable, in my opinion. Yes, it is. And guess what? What is more interesting than learning how to integrate and challenging yourself how to integrate what you already learned into something new? You're always changing the way you learn instead of having someone else decide how you learn it. If you think about that just for a moment. So I'm not just learning because someone else told me how to learn the best. I'm learning because I'm learning how to integrate everything I've learned before into something that's new. So the challenge here is to develop a new way of learning that's for myself. So it just so happens that there's another Asian American who speaks English who's acquiring Japanese as a second language, then perhaps that experience is transferable to that person. Otherwise, the way I'm learning is to demonstrate the process of how I take my previous experience and mold it into something useful. So I rarely ever have the problem of saying my habit is bad, my habit is undesirable. I need to spend the next year undoing several years of my life before only to acquire a new skill. No, I'm just gonna bend everything and make it something. So someone asked me like, well, then you won't sound like a native Japanese speaker. It's like, well, I'm not a native Japanese speaker. I'm an English speaker trying to understand Japanese. It's not everyone's desire, right? Like, it's up to you. You can spend the next year or two trying to learn the right way by undoing everything you've learned before. I just choose not to. So when someone says, well, you're never going to sound Japanese, I'm like, I'm not trying to sound Japanese. I'm trying to sound an English person who speaks Japanese, because I don't abandon my heritage and my identity. I want to be something more than that, in my opinion. That could hurt some people, like, you know, purists and whatnot, and I agree. If your aim is to sound just like Japanese people, you are probably going to have to unlearn something. I don't want to sound like just any Japanese person. I want to sound like a Chinese American who speaks Japanese. And learning process is unique to me. So I don't ever sell hot takes on how to learn. I share ideas so that other people can continue to build on their learning process instead of constantly destroying their learning process. This was always boggling my mind. Why we don't mind listening to Hindu people speaking with their weird English accent, but everyone expects a Japanese learning speaking everyone expects a person learning Japanese to speak with perfect Japanese accent. Yeah, it's a cultural dissonance, right? It's a cultural dissonance. I sort of talked about this a little bit about I used English as the example instead of Hindu, because we're talking about Hindu people speaking with an English accent, and English is culturally acceptable and tolerant. It's the system. So I agree that I will offend or I will not conform to Japanese speaking. So I will get flack for having not like pronouncing Japanese with a Japanese accent. It's inherently cultural, right? Learning the Japanese language will teach you indirectly or intuitively that Japanese is a conformist society. It's a society that has lots of dictation rules, and that's the elegance and that's the elegance and the charm of Japanese. Meanwhile, on the English side, it's messy and accepting. So for better or for worse, that kind of seems like I love English accents. Tommy, you probably have a really wonderful speaking English accent. If you trained out your English accent, like your Polish English accent, that to me kind of dwarfs the English culturalism, in my opinion. It's not for everyone. Like I know I'm gonna have opponents on this, but English accents make you very identifiable. It makes you charming because you're adding something to the English language. But that's a non-conformist approach. It's the English is widely used, so what's chicken or the egg? Is the tolerance of English because it's widely used, or because it's widely used and therefore English is more tolerant, right? So, but I'm an exception. Most Polish people have trouble with English accent. Yeah. So for me, that's the irony here, Tommy. Like for me I consider myself pretty well educated in English, at least. I absolutely love the English language. When I go to a university, I don't expect to hear everyone speak the same English accent. I legitimately do not. It is not the social norm for a highly educated place to have not have everyone sound exactly the same or strive to sound the same. They attempt to articulate and communicate their idea by working with what they have, not against what they have. In my opinion, in my personal opinion, that is the way. So when you get higher in like a academic setting, English accents become norm. It's actually the norm not to hear the same English accent. I'm actually surprised how often I don't hear, like when I meet another Asian American, right? If I meet another Asian American, I get a little surprised if that person sounds exactly like me, like with the same accent, pitch accent and all that, or even the same speech pattern for that matter. Like speech pattern, cadence, intonation, and emphasis, if it's the same, it's the weirdest thing in English. Like it is so weird to hear yourself reflected in their speech pattern. I hope that when you go and see another Chinese American talk, they don't sound like me in English. As in, like, if you're into Japanese as much as you think you are with pitch accents, cadence, mora, all that stuff, now go to each American speaker and you can probably point out how they're different. Their tone, right? Their tone and range might be similar. Like a man sounds kind of closer to another man than, you know, a woman sounds closer to another woman. But when you get into the nitty gritty of the mora, and the beats, the emphasis, the pitch accents of Japanese, and then you go back to English, you'll notice that everyone speaks very differently. It's almost uncategorizable once you get to that level of detail. And that's what I hear in English. When I hear someone choose words, like for example, I had a little debate earlier. Just that person's that word has given the person away. So in English, there's no right way of, like, there's no right or wrong way of doing things. They're just your ways of doing things. And there are lots of patterns associated with those things. And there's plenty of them. And it's endless. So as long as you continue to explore those patterns, you can read into someone's subtext. Like, for example, the very obvious pattern is negation. English people, they can choose to sound negating all the time, or they can choose to sound affirmative. It's neither rude or happy, or it's contextually based. So someone who's they can smile and speak all negative sentences. Would that be considered negative or positive to someone? Well, it's gonna be like, it depends. In Japanese, it's like, if you add des, which was the root of that argument earlier, if you add des, it's polite, it's more polite. Well, how do you do that in English? I can tell you many different patterns you can approach in making your English softer, as in more articulate in a way. So generally speaking, I sound the way I sound because of my historical background, my education. You can add sir to be more polite. Ooh, but that could also be submissive and condescending. Like, for example, you can be submissive. Sir, yes, sir, right? Submissive. Or you can say, sir, yes, sir. As in, like, you're not really, it's not committed. So you're more like undermining the person. So it's, oof. And you can't do that flexible, in my opinion, because I don't know enough about Japanese yet. You can't flex that much, or else you're going to get a different meaning. I guess it can be more dominant also. Yes. So you can't, and you have to be really careful, right? Yeah. And you have to be really careful with Japanese, because you might actually end up saying something different, like literally different, because of your pitch accent. But in English, it's not the meaning that has, it's not like the literal word has changed, it's the undertone. And I absolutely love, like, have you ever listened, here's the thing. If you have a Italian influencer, right? Check out an Italian influencer and pay attention to how their English express anger versus how a, like, Irish person's English expresses anger. It's so different, and it's all acceptable. And somehow, as a native English speaker, if you have enough exposure, you can actually misread someone. Like, the reason why I picked Italian and Irish is because I actually have personal experience with this. But a lot of times when I had a boss who's Italian, and her volume doesn't suggest anger a lot of times because she has an Italian accent, right? And that Italian accent also has higher range, like a higher volume. The volume is consistently higher. So when she sounds like she's angry, she's not angry, right? It's just the volume is higher. It's her Italian accent. My parents will always sound like my parents, but I can still understand them if they try to speak English, right? So it's kind of one of those things, like, am I learning Japanese wrong? The answer is yes. I am learning Japanese wrong. Or Japanese speaking. Do I learn the best that way? Quote unquote. If you're talking about learning the best, or like maybe speed, for example, speed, my thought is an absolute no. I don't work against myself. I always work with myself. I don't beat myself up because of the things I don't want in myself. I don't allow people to tell me that, oh, that part of you sucks for Japanese. It's like, well, you know what? I'm just gonna have to suck it up in that way. It's also relative, yes. And that's the idea. But that doesn't stop you from a conformist perspective of what is the best way, right? So naturally, it's not a coincidence that we're still having this conversation now with company that possibly are more open-minded. So those that aren't here are the ones that do not believe the best method is relative, if you know what I mean. Like subconsciously, they have, in my opinion, a cognitive dissonance. They may say it's all relative, but they're projecting the best way. You are projecting, your actions are suggesting there is a best way by saying there is a correct way and there's a wrong way. That is creating zeros and ones, which makes best methods and worst methods possible. And that's perfectly acceptable. It doesn't go both ways though. This person will tell me I'm just BSing and stuff, and they move along. That's fine. And I'm not hurt about it because I know that I will have opponents, right? Opponents that will say, well, you're doing it wrong. Like, I agree with you. To you, you believe I'm doing it wrong. I'm not going to gaslight you and say it's not the wrong way. Because if you believe it's the wrong way, then it is the wrong way. Don't tell me to feel wrong about it. That's a whole different story. Like, if you're trying to convince me that I should think it's the wrong way, then I'm too old for that, man. I mean, I'm only 37 and I still feel too old about that. Imagine going up to a 60-year-old and telling them like, hey, you've been doing this your whole entire life wrong, and you're like this 27-year-old, like, say, I'm a native speaker. I'm gonna go up to this 60-year-old and say, your whole life was wrong. That's gonna be an uphill battle for you. I'm 37. I know my methods. I love to take in new things, but they're always going to be different. Like, for example, Tommy, whatever way you learn in Japanese, I'll take it from you. Give me that. Give me that information. Indy, whatever he feels like shining and like sharing and stuff, I'm going to take that. It's just not going to be replacing anything I'm doing. It's going to be added to what I'm doing. I don't want to forget my experiences. I don't want to unlearn things. I want to add them. It's always adding. You're building on top of things. You're not breaking down things. That's a young person's perspective, in my opinion. And I do teach sometimes. I don't really talk to a lot of young people. Like, I really don't talk to a lot of young people. Like, really, really young. It's actually very difficult for me to do. I have an unpracticed skill. So I generally have a cutoff at like 16 or 17. And anyone older, because they typically will have, statistically likely to have certain experiences that allow them to understand some of this stuff, or maybe resonate. So for me, the life lesson here is you take whatever is offered, be grateful about it, be gracious as much as you can, and you build it in your own image. If you're 25 plus now, the thing that stands out most is your own image, at least in the American way. Like, if you're in the United States, the thing that makes you stand out the most is how you build on top of everything. Not you're gonna be the same as someone else. when you be the same as someone else, we're talking about something else now. We're talking about like the Japanese culture, right? And that is a great way if you're living in Japan. If you want to be like someone else because the rules and stuff are strict, be a great businessman, you must behave this way. Like, that's great. I don't live in Japan. That's why when someone says they want to move to Japan, I'm like, I hope you have the mindset and you're immersed in Japanese culture, because Japanese culture is a monocultural thing. They're brilliant in the way that they do it consistently, because if you look at their language that we're learning and looking at how their culture is projected through their language, be aware that if you go to Japan and you say Duolingo sucks, Japan is not for you. That's a really big leap. But when you say the system sucks and you blame the system, Japan is not a culture that you want to head into. Because the last thing Japanese people would do is blame the system. They would blame themselves. Like, it's the fault is in the person. So if you can convince someone something, that's not how Japanese culture works. The system works. You bend to the system, right? Because the system is what keeps all the standards and stuff consistent. That's why I love Japanese and the Japanese culture. I'm not sure if I'm willing to want to become Japanese. I have no goal of becoming more Japanese. I always want to be a gaijin, right? A gaijin from the outside who can communicate at least appropriately to a Japanese person. Because my place, it might sound like a nationalistic thing but I can never be pure anything. I'm Asian American. What am I gonna do? My parents always tell me like, well, that's not what Chinese people do. Like, yeah. Different lens. I'm a Chinese household raised kid in a multi-white American generational background. So is it the wrong or the right way? It's my way. It's my way. So here's a fun thing, and I think Indy, I don't know if Indy likes being that. I like being told that I do something different. So what I mean is, wow, you're wasting your time doing something no one else does. Good. Awesome. I mean, I'm a content creator, but loosely, I'm a casual content creator. What do I have to offer? Well, I like to offer conversation and topics, hopefully not like 100 million people cover at the same time. If you want to learn Japanese the correct way, go to the 100,000 like content creators who teach you Japanese in the very specific way they do. That reflects a standard. If you're here to talk about Japanese and talk about how all the weird things you do and all the weird things you think about, I'm here with you. I'm absolutely here with you. Tell me all the weird things you do that someone is telling you is wrong or right or very good or very not, because that's what I'm here for. Why interact with a human being when you don't pay attention to what they do? Like, that's aggressive. But generally speaking, I do not resonate with people who see what they think is right and expect others to behave the same way. That is kind of the Japanese way, in a sense, because everyone's expected to behave within a realm. I want to see, tell me what you're embarrassed about, and I will convince you. Thankfully, no one says to me I'm learning wrong. Like, if someone tells you you're learning wrong, all I can tell you is, if you give me 15 to 30 minutes, I can probably at least share with you why I don't think it's wrong and how you could turn your learning experience into something that benefits you and also possibly make people hate you less, I guess. Make people think you're less wrong, I suppose. But I don't develop my learning methods because it was right or wrong. I develop my learning methods and approaches because I learn all the ideas from other people, and I took what I want from them. They shared it. Hey, how do I approach Japanese? I watched 50 influencers, and I sort them by their influence count, like their social media, like impact, like just did some very, it's a little bit more than that. And then I watch some of their stuff overlapping, and I decided to take very specific elements of every single person's take, and I mold it into this. So I decided to cluster particles because I believe particles are the most elegant parts in the Japanese language. So I even speak, all my speech and writing revolves around particle separation. Did any of them do that? No, they really actually didn't. Actually, they discouraged that. Well, most of them. But the stuff they said, all the like the 50 influencers, they had specific patterns that I really liked, like the emphasis on pitch accents, or the emphasis on homophones, or the Mora, lots of Mora lectures. Like all of them had different emphasis. So I only took I know what they did, but now I took all the things that are most attractive to me, because like you said, learning, if you're motivated to learn and you're learning the way you feel comfortable and are always encouraging to yourself, you're gonna learn it. Are you gonna learn it identically to all the other people? No, absolutely not. Am I ever going to sound like a native speaker? No, probably not. But you know what I would love? Because I speak like jank Japanese, at least there are going to be a lot of people who share with me how they speak Japanese. Because I'm not representing a country of speakers that I can't possibly represent. Like, I don't want to be something I'm not. That's kind of weird, so to speak. So if I ever move to Japan, for example, I am there to be an English person in Japan. As in, if I go to Japan, the things that I do is to spread my identity with Japan, not against Japan. I don't want to be a person who tells Japan to unlearn their things because I think it's better. And I hope that mutually they don't tell me that what I am is wrong and unlearn that. So I'll give the olive branch to the other person. And learning is the same way. And this is a great digression because we're going to go in and I'm going to section this off. And it's a great way to say that if you're on the internet, right? I know that there are a lot of people who subconsciously intuit wrong and right and best. Even if they say like, oh yeah, you know, I try to take it at my own pace and stuff. But you are bombarded every single day. When you watch sensational stuff, you know, the best of stuff, it's not that you don't believe that it's relative. It's the idea that your behavior will intuitively become that. As in, you can't help but feel guilty, like man, I should be working on my kana right now. Like, ooh, like every day someone keeps saying like kana is really important. Even if you believe it's relative, it will probably not get you to feel any better about how many times you're reminded. So I know that you're thankful that nobody says to you you're learning wrong. And here's the funny deep cut. If you're in Japan, a Japanese person is probably likely not going to approach you and say you're learning it wrong. There are a lot of cultural politeness, even in the even in American society, there's a lot of cultural politeness where there's enough awareness to say that maybe I shouldn't go and tell someone that they're wrong outright. Although it does happen a lot more in Western society than Eastern society. Because generally speaking, if you're seen as a foreigner, spoken from a Chinese perspective, I suppose, sort of a Chinese perspective, my parents wouldn't go out of their way to tell someone that what you're doing is wrong. It's public politeness. You may try to hint or demonstrate that you do it differently, but it's aggressively impolite to suggest that someone's way of living is different as long as their mindset is correct. So it's a double standard. My parents see me as, by extension, a Chinese person, so they have no problems telling me that what I'm doing is not Chinese. When that person is clearly not Chinese, right? They don't have the motivation necessarily. They can tolerate the idea that, oh, this person is a gaijin. Let's be tolerant and be polite. So that's kind of the irony here when it comes to comparing a Western speaker, a native Western speaker, like English is my primary language, versus Japanese. And that thing that you said about how it still baffles you to this day where people who learn Japanese are expected to have Japanese perfect pitch, I think that puts a smile on my face, because what that's telling me is those people, they're really getting into the Japanese culture. Like, what I mean is, imagine learning Japanese when you were young. Yeah, they usually cut foreigners some slack. Yeah, it's because their mindset is you're a foreigner. And I like that. I like that Japan has a culture that emphasizes being tolerant of foreigners while also embracing the harshest, strictest expectation of their own people. That goes with China as well. It's kind of the whole Asian thing, right? So when someone wants to be them, if you learn their language, you kind of end up sounding like that. Me and Indy, I was like talking to Indy briefly. It's like, man, it's kind of an irony here, but we act more and more Japanese the more and more Japanese we learn, because we're constantly reinforcing rules. Like, eventually you become more Japanese than you would like learning like, that's why when learning a language, you can get immersed in their culture indirectly, because the language really does reflect a lot of the mannerisms and culturalisms of the country. Japanese language and its writing system is not very tolerant to, breaking the rules. So naturally, even though we're a group of all secondary Japanese learners, we are acting way more strict than we would with our English, because the rules and stuff are incredibly important in the Japanese language. So you can't help but normalize that. So yeah, I think it's acceptable to some extent, as long as no feelings are hurt, I suppose. It's acceptable that someone is very critical about my pronunciation in Japanese. That's basically intuiting the Japanese culture. You are intuiting, not intellectually being aware, though. I focus more on intellectual awareness, in my opinion. I'm perfectly acceptable and not like, I'm not offended when someone comes in and say, well, you're pronouncing Japanese incorrectly. This is the right way to pronounce Japanese. Like, absolutely. Can I do it? Kind of yes. I'm going to say kind of yes, if I really tried. Do I want to? And when someone asks me that question instead, you got my full attention. Because the first thing you have to ask when it comes to an English culturalism is you got to ask them what they want to do first. You don't assume what they want to do. It's a lot easier and more consistent in Japanese. to assume what they want to do. They want to speak perfect Japanese. That's the goal. Would I ever tell any like if there's a Japanese speaker who comes to me and say, I want to learn English? It's like, well, first, I already talked about this like a couple of times ago for like an hour or two. The first thing you have to do is understand that your English is going to be different. So you actually like to learn the wrong way method after all? Here's my thing, right? I want to stay connected to my language, to my language of choice. So when someone is worried, like I get this a lot, and I speak to a lot of Polish people ironically because I typically stream way before. I used to play games where it's usually that time zone. So Poland, Germany, Netherlands, and occasionally Scandinavian, right? Sorry, Finland, Norway, and Sweden, but Scandinavian. And a lot of times they don't say much and they don't express much because the first thing they think about is, oh, my English isn't good enough, or my English, there was a linguist who came in and said, oh yeah, this doesn't matter. It really does matter. And I'm going to drill this point again. In English, you have to know what the baseline is. And the culture behind English. When you speak, to me at least, and a large majority of native speakers, you're gonna get the genuine response like, oh, your English is quite good. Like, actually, most people's countries, you know, the stereotype where, oh my gosh, these Japanese people speak English better than the vast majority of English speakers in the United States or something, because the baseline is different. All that harshness of monocultural conformists sets a higher baseline. So in fact, I actually agree with most people, say like, oh yeah, your baseline level of English comprehension, even as a secondary language in a different country, is higher. But that's the charm of English. Like, you should not feel guilty of an ESL because it's really tolerable to that. Like, are you afraid of breaking rules in English? Don't be. So that is kind of the thing that what I'm talking about, where you have to understand the culturalism, in my opinion. Immerse in the culture, learning the language. In Japanese, you're gonna learn to get it right. You better get it right. Yeah, English is now, yeah, I just read that before on the headlines just recently, that English has now become the most spoken language in the world. You know, it used to be it used to be collectively the Indian language, or collectively the Chinese language, like collectively, as in collecting all the dialects and the regions and stuff. But now English is the most spoken. And I think for better or for worse, if an English speaker should take the opposite mentality than a Japanese speaker. Basically, when someone says, oh, I don't know how to pronounce this. Is this wada? Like, I think it's wada. Isn't it water? And I'm like, yeah. I mean, it is. If it is, I know what you're saying. It's water. So, go for it. Like, what if I pronounced it like, skirto? It's like, I know you're saying skirt, dude. It's fine. Just say skirto. It's fine. Like, that's, and then they can choose. Here it is. Here's the big wraparound to the initial question to this. They can choose WADA. Yeah, WADA. Exactly. In Boston is WADA. WADA. Like W-A-W. WADA. Or water. Water. So you add the A-W. Like, aw. Kind of thing. So it goes back to the beginning of the whole, like, oh no, I lost my segue. Back to beginning. I think English just requires a different embracing. So you learn something, quote unquote, your way, which could be the wrong way, and then you learn to adapt that into a way that you want. So I'm using that same approach here. Will I ever get to the correct way in Japanese? There is a chance. There's a chance I might. I always start with my way. So I have to learn my way. That is pretty much all the ideas of the right way, but just like Frankenstein together. Am I going to create bad habits that will constantly reinforce something that isn't the right way? Absolutely. Absolutely, Tommy. So when you're saying, do I ever have an English word that I've been using incorrectly for a while? There probably are, and I had to be reminded of it. But that's not the point of English. The point of English is you learn as much as you can your way, and you adopt new ways as you go. As opposed to in Japanese, there's only one way, and if you don't adopt that way, you're always going to be wrong. So yeah, I'm gonna go through stages. I'm gonna sound like a pep. So when I learned new vocabulary today was my vocabulary day. So I did no reviews. So I will always sound terrible in the beginning. In English, you'll always sound like you in the beginning. That's it. Period. At least from my perspective, I will never tell, I won't, 99% of the time, I won't say someone like, hey, you're learning this new vocabulary. How do you think this word is pronounced? And then they say, it's like, start there. That's it. Just start there. One day you'll hear it enough and you'll get it. Whatever way it is. It'll be close enough. In Japanese, like, whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa. You said that wrong. You don't want to like get stuck saying that wrong. It's getting really late. Oh yeah, I know. It's wow. Yeah, it's almost 2:30, right? Where you are? Probably 2:30 a.m. Yeah, thanks for hanging out, Tommy. I really appreciate the candor. It's pretty awesome to meet a Polish person who learned English as a second language and then went on to learn Japanese. No, I really appreciate it. Thanks. Yeah, sleep well. I'm gonna wrap up here. I'm a little over. Okay, so what can we say on a hot take? On a hot take, I have to apologize in advance to Japanese speakers, right? And to that one guy. I've been using that one guy as today as a reference, but I'm sure that guy is really good with Japanese and know a lot of things about Japanese, way more than I do at this point, because I am playing catch up. I hope that guy speaks incredible Japanese, right? And I basically failed to express in English what I meant. And maybe I'll do better next time, probably. Be able to identify that des, for better or for worse, Duolingo drilled it into me that des helps me associate something else. So whenever I see the word des, I remind myself of pronouns. So maybe that'll go away. I'll untrain that, or not really untrain it. I'll know now that I'll have this discussion, right? So now I'll always know that I can remove des. Isn't that great? Like, what I mean is, did I learn something wrong to correct it later? I didn't. Because I know that I can place des in there. It'll remind me of the pronouns, and I know I can remove it to sound less polite. And I also know that most people don't think des serves another function. There you have it. How's that work? I tell stories to remember things. I personally think the biggest hot take is, why spend all your time trying to forget things you spent time doing? That is just Oh, I just said the just thing. I'm not gonna try to make it sound too simple. It is highly illogical to me, irrationally compromising to think the best, a more desirable way to learn and acquire skills is by first spending all that time unlearning things up to this moment. You don't have to unlearn things when you are young. You can even choose some occasions to unlearn things. And guess what? Those young people unlearn them. So what am I saying? Someone plays baseball, they quit and play basketball. When you ask them 30 years later, do you remember how to play baseball? They're going to say no. You might be thinking, oh yeah, but it's like riding a bike. Sort of. You're talking about riding a bike when someone had a young phase and then kept that in their memory into adulthood, and then the adult is reflecting on a skill that they kept with them. That is very different, in my opinion. When an adult revisits a memory, they're choosing not to forget and not to unlearn. It is an uphill battle. With every advancing year in your life, you're going to have more and more things to unlearn. It is, to me, the literal definition of counterproductive. When you try to deconstruct and destroy your own experiences in order to learn a prescribed way that doesn't take advantage of those experiences. You still do a bit of unlearning. For certain things, yes, you're going to do that. Expecting that's normal is a whole different ball game than expecting you can look to take advantage of it. So when someone says, I wasted my time, I should have learned it this way, then I'm not talking to those people. I'm not talking about or to those people. They can be perfectly successful that way. I do not do that. When I learn, I choose not to do that. Everything about my life up to this moment is valuable, and I will try my darndest to keep it, not to remove it. So what is that like? What kind of skill that requires? A scientist. If you want to be a deep thinker, if you want to be someone who's cultured, you can't necessarily do that. How do you unculture yourself? Good luck. Good luck with that. If you want to live in a bubble and become a specialist and become famous for something really, really good, that can work. That can definitely work. You know, not remove the adulterated nature. Not all that noise. Remove all that noise. Today, I basically learned nothing really because I don't remember any of it. I kind of remember some stuff. Tomorrow's introduction is going to be weird because I do remember a lot of context clues. But what I'm going to remember today is all the discussions I've had so far. And that is far more valuable than understanding when to use sono. Sorry, Japanese people. When to use sono and when not to use sono. That comes later. It can come later at any time. So if you're not good at... The weird thing is, I don't think people are good at unlearning things. I'm not good at unlearning things. In my opinion. You can't... It's very difficult for humans to just simply forget. I mean, you can decide on unhealthy ways of forgetting, certainly. And I would not recommend those. Those are health hazards. And then you can also spend your whole lifetime fighting against yourself in a vicious cycle of emotional diminished return, right? Because the more experience you have, the less and less choice you'll have. How do you remain a learning person? Well, you're not afraid of the idea of unlearning, because you're not. You're never unlearning. You're always learning forward. Learning is cumulative. It's not destructive. So to resonate with me, if you are a compulsive learner and you enjoy learning, learning is a non-destructive process. Practicing, studying, mastering, well, specifically practicing and mastering something can be a destructive process. As in, you have to sacrifice certain things in order to make room for perfection or whatever, your ideal perfection. For me, you're gonna hear some Japanglish. Sorry, like Japanglish is here to stay. Thankfully, I don't tell Japanese people that I'm Japanese because I think that would be disrespectful and offensive. I can tell a Japanese person I'm trying my best. And I think at least even to people who are outside Japan would find that at least admirable. And for me, I am more likely someone who is going to be able to encourage someone else to learn Japanese than someone who goes around saying, whipping the, because for those people who are going to learn Japanese the Japanese way, they don't need any help. Like, they're not going to even talk about it. They're just going to do it. You need to be a certain type to become a native Japanese speaker, self-motivated, right? You're strong, work hard, kind of closeted. Like when I mean closeted, I mean like closeted thinking to work. That sounds a little unfun to me. So no disrespect, but it's not fun for me. I like my stories. So what did I learn today? I'm going to probably review this tomorrow. I learned steaky, right? Because steaky is like steak in Polish, right? I know that sono, kono is not kono wa, right? You can't kono wa anything, right? We had a talk about buste again. All these things, all these little things like owie for blue, our discussions for red and orange. That's it. Those are the things. I don't want to I wouldn't give up those things for that. So how do you engage yourself when you're learning something? You have your stories. You have your experiences. I don't need anyone to tell me to learn Japanese because I would do it. Just because I will make stories. That's a fact. Just because I'll make new memories and I'll keep those memories with me. When someone tells me I'm doing the Japanese wrong, it's not going to discourage me, because when they're telling me it's wrong, I'll just have them explain to me why it's wrong, and then I'll take it. And unfortunately, I don't give much back unless they sit here and find out that it's not about being wrong and right. When it comes to like learning is learning. If you learn a bad way and then you're saying I need to correct it, guess what? You get to learn how you correct things you don't desire. If you never learn bad things, you never learn how to correct things. So imagine how a Japanese person feels and a Chinese person feels. And I can kind of speak to a Chinese person a little bit. When you spend your whole life only learning the right way, when the wrong way comes around, how do you fix it? My life skills here, learning requires the ability to correct things. Problem solving requires making mistakes and practicing the skill of how to change it, not correct it. Correcting would suggest it's wrong in the first place. Well, if you think it's wrong, you'll never learn anything from it because you don't get to keep it. If you correct something and forget that you ever learned something, you're never going to learn anything from it. It's almost antithesis of learning. So if I make a mistake, if I create a bad habit, they stay with me. They stay with me forever. Those are learning lessons. I wouldn't ever try to forget all my mistakes and my learning lessons. How are you going to manage stress? How are you going to learn how to adjust the next time you make a mistake? Are you just going to beat yourself up all over again the same way? You didn't learn from that. At least my 2 cents. And I really appreciate, again, the person I alienated, probably. Ben, as I refer to him. I love that Indy, Lotus, Blue, Tommy, even Fictitious chimed in on, you know, Fictitious it's just, I love these discussions. And the idea is, it might sound like a cop-out, but generally speaking, if you make wrong things work, without, you know, like yourself, right? We're talking about learning. We're not talking about like war and stuff. Not that. If you're self-improving and if you make wrong things work, is it wrong in the first place for yourself? It's just, my answer is no. It's never. If I can't do it the right way, I'm going to do it my way. And right now, I clearly can't do it the right way, so I'm going to do it my way until maybe one day I get it right, possibly. If not, move along. All right, folks, and that's a good little, I haven't had one of these in a while, so there you go. That's the end of week 3. That's a good summary of week 3, really. This was like largely the experience with Duolingo, right? You get some people who disagree with me, and then some people who wants to gaslight me, but at the same time I tried my best and I failed adequately, I guess acceptingly failed to communicate. We'll probably never hear from each other again. It's fair enough. And I've got a lot of other people who are passionate, talking about their experiences and sharing a lot of spoilers. I practically learned a lot from just communicating about Japanese, not through Duolingo, weirdly enough, but Duolingo is a spark. So it is, I still owe it to Duolingo to spark all these conversations. All right, folks, thanks for listening. Thanks for chilling. Definitely go out there, learn a new language, get immersed in the culture, you know, take it in any way possible. It's always nice to feel a little cultured. I really highly encourage other people to think it's not worth unlearning things, in my opinion. It's taking a piece of you and throwing it in the garbage. And nah, this might sound sappy, but I prefer to accept the person and then have them build upon a foundation that they have, know what it works for them and what doesn't work, but keep it at heart. When you unlearn something, you literally are going to unlearn something. A human does not have enough clairvoyance to know how valuable those learning experiences are going to be for the rest of their life. So, learning experiences are invaluable. Unlearning them is weird and counterproductive. Right. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy. As always, mata ashita. じゃあね。